A cat is sealed in a steel box with a vial of poison and a radioactive atom. Is it alive or is it dead? For nearly a century, pop culture has told you that according to quantum physics, the cat is both. But here's the truth. The man who invented that thought experiment didn't believe the cat was a blurry dual-state entity. He wrote the scenario as a sarcastic joke to prove how absurd quantum physicists were becoming. His name was Erwin Schrödinger, and while the world misunderstood his cat, they completely missed his real legacy, a mathematical equation that built the modern world and a single biological prediction that paved the way for the discovery of DNA.
But before we explore that legacy, a necessary boundary must be drawn here. While we are exploring his intellect, Schrödinger's personal life was marked by deeply disturbing and unacceptable conduct that remains a dark stain on his history. Although his personal actions deserve clear condemnation, our focus in this video remains strictly on the profound science he left behind.
August 12, 1887. Erwin Schrödinger was born into a bilingual household in Vienna, Austria, a city humming with intellectual energy. From a young age, Erwin didn't just study the world, he dissected its logic. He was obsessed with the strict grammatical rules of ancient languages and German poetry. His peers at the Akademisches Gymnasium noted his terrifying ability to instantly comprehend and playfully solve advanced physics equations on the blackboard, often without ever doing his homework. He enrolled at the University of Vienna in 1906, studying theoretical physics, and earned his doctorate by 1910. When World War I broke out, he served as an artillery officer and meteorology instructor in the Austrian military, but his mind never left the atomic realm. He continued his theoretical physics research in his spare time, scribbling calculations between his duties. But Schrödinger wasn't just a quantum physicist. He was a polymath, and his first major scientific breakthrough actually had nothing to do with atoms. It was about how you see the world, literally. Between 1918 and 1920, Schrödinger immersed himself in the science of human vision. At the time, biologists were arguing over two competing ideas. The trichromatic theory said our eyes use three types of color receptors: red, green, and blue. The opponent process theory argued that vision works through opposing channels, like red versus green or blue versus yellow. Schrödinger realized the problem wasn't the biology, it was the math. Standard flat geometry doesn't work for human vision because our perception of color isn't linear. If you change the brightness of a hue, your brain perceives the color itself shifting, a quirk known as the Bezold-Brucke effect.
To fix this, Schrödinger became a mathematical map maker. Just as a flat map distorts the curved surface of the Earth, standard math distorted color. He proposed a projective geometry of color space using complex, non-Euclidean models to calculate the exact perceptual distances between different colors. Using this new mathematical architecture, he proved that the two competing biological theories were actually formally equivalent. They were just two different mathematical representations of the exact same physiological reality. His work laid the foundation for the precise color calibration tools used in digital visualization and photography today. In 1920, he married Anne-Marie Bertel, and shortly after, he was appointed to a prestigious chair in theoretical physics at the University of Zurich. It was here that his mind would fundamentally alter the trajectory of human knowledge. By the early 1920s, physics was in a state of crisis. The classical rules of Isaac Newton were falling apart at the atomic level. In 1924, a physicist named Louis de Broglie suggested a radical idea. What if matter, like electrons, didn't just act like solid little billiard balls? What if they also acted like waves? It was a brilliant hypothesis, but it lacked a mechanical engine. De Broglie hadn't provided a governing equation to calculate how these hypothetical matter waves actually moved and changed over time. Schrödinger turned to it upon himself to find one. He turned to classical optics, the physics of light rays,
and synthesized it with particle mechanics. The core of his insight relied on something called the Hamiltonian operator. In classical physics, the Hamiltonian is a mathematical tool used to sum up the total energy of a system, its kinetic motion, and its stored potential. Schrödinger translated this classical tool into a quantum mechanical operator. In 1926, he published his breakthrough, the Schrödinger wave equation. To understand why this was revolutionary, picture a guitar string. When you pluck it, the string is confined between two fixed points. Because it's tied down, it can't just vibrate any way it wants. It can only vibrate at specific, discrete frequencies. Schrödinger applied this exact logic to the atomic world. Using his equation to model a particle in a box, an electron confined by energy walls, he showed that the wave function must drop to zero at the boundaries. Because of this confinement, the electron can only exist at specific, discrete energy levels. He mathematically proved why quantum states are quantized. When he applied his equation to the hydrogen atom, his numbers perfectly matched the real-world emission spectra that scientists had been observing for years. Initially, Schrödinger thought his wave function represented a literal physical smearing of an electron's charge across space. But another physicist, Max Born, soon provided the accepted interpretation. The wave function doesn't map physical density, it maps probability density. It tells you the exact mathematical likelihood of finding a particle at a specific coordinate in space.
But there was a problem. Just months before Schrödinger published his wave mechanics, Werner Heisenberg had introduced matrix mechanics, a highly abstract, discrete mathematical system that predicted the exact same atomic behaviors, but without any visualizable waves. The physics community was split. Schrödinger stepped in and authored a rigorous proof demonstrating that his continuous waves and Heisenberg's discrete matrices were mathematically equivalent. They were simply two distinct languages describing the identical underlying physics. This monumental achievement catapulted him to the epicenter of global science. In 1927, he succeeded Max Planck at the University of Berlin. In 1933, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. But 1933 was also the year the Nazi regime seized power in Germany. Opposing their rise, Schrödinger packed his bags and left for Oxford. By 1935, Schrödinger was deeply frustrated with his own colleagues. The mainstream physics community had rallied around the Copenhagen interpretation, championed by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg. This interpretation claimed that quantum entities do not possess definite properties until they are measured. Before you look, an atom isn't just unknown, it exists in a superposition of all possible states simultaneously. Schrödinger hated this. He corresponded with Albert Einstein, who shared his disdain of the idea that reality only exists when observed. In early letters, Einstein suggested a scenario where a quantum trigger sets off a charge of macroscopic gunpowder, trying to show how scaling up atomic weirdness leads to logical nonsense. Schrödinger took Einstein's gunpowder, swapped it for a cat, and published his defining essay, The Present Situation in Quantum Mechanics. Here is the famous paradox. A live cat is placed in a sealed steel chamber. Inside is a Geiger counter, a microscopic trace of radioactive material, and a flask of hydrocyanic acid. If a single atom decays, the counter triggers, a hammer shatters the flask, and the cat dies. If no atom decays, the cat lives. Because the radioactive decay is a quantum event, the Copenhagen interpretation dictates that the atom is simultaneously decayed and not decayed until someone looks. Therefore, Schrödinger argued sarcastically, the entire system must be linked. The math would force you to say the cat is equally living and dead at the same time. He didn't write this to say the cat was actually a blurry dual-state entity. He wrote it as a reductio ad absurdum, a logical takedown intended to expose the flaw in the Copenhagen interpretation. The cat is always strictly alive or strictly dead, independent of a human opening the box. Schrödinger was forcing physicists to confront the measurement problem, the exact boundary where microscopic quantum rules dissolve into classical macroscopic reality. But that 1935 paper held a second, even more profound idea. In response to another paper by Einstein, Schrödinger coined the German term Verschränkung, which translates to entanglement. Einstein had pointed out that quantum math allowed for two distant particles to instantly influence one another, something he dismissed as a mathematical bug. But Schrödinger recognized it wasn't a bug. He defined entanglement as the total impossibility of separating the quantum state of a connected system into individual parts once they have interacted. He identified entanglement as not a mere artifact, but the defining trait of quantum mechanics. Modern laboratory experiments have consistently proven him right. In 1940, Schrödinger moved to the Institute for Advanced Studies in Dublin, Ireland, becoming the director of theoretical physics. It was here that his polymath mind turned toward biology. In February 1943, he delivered a series of public lectures asking a monumental question: how can the events inside a living organism be accounted for by physics and chemistry? These lectures became the 1944 book, What is Life? Schrödinger approached biology strictly through the lens of thermodynamics. He observed that living organisms managed to maintain staggering degrees of order, seemingly defying the second law of thermodynamics, which dictates that systems trend toward chaos or entropy. He theorized that living organisms survive by feeding on negative entropy, extracting highly ordered energy from their environment to maintain their internal stability. Then, he tackled heredity. At the time, the molecular structure of DNA was entirely unknown. Schrödinger calculated that to store the vast amount of information required to build a human, the hereditary material must possess a highly specific atomic structure. He hypothesized the existence of an aperiodic crystal. Think of a standard crystal, like table salt. It is highly stable, but it repeats the exact same atomic motif infinitely. It's like a wall covered with repeating wallpaper. It looks nice, but it can't store complex information. Schrödinger proposed that biological genetic material must be crystalline to maintain physical stability and resist the chaotic thermal noise of the atomic realm. But it must be aperiodic, possessing a stable but non-repeating structure. Instead of wallpaper, it's a written book. The exact, varied sequence of atoms acts as a hereditary code script. This precise framing of genetic inheritance as a physical information storage problem was a lightning bolt. It directly inspired a generation of physicists to pivot into biology. James Watson and Crick both explicitly credited Schrödinger's concept of the aperiodic crystal as the direct theoretical inspiration for their 1953 discovery of the double helix structure of DNA. In his later years, Schrödinger became a strict wave monist. Despite the widespread acceptance of wave-particle duality, he pushed to eliminate the concept of discrete particles entirely, arguing that the universe consisted solely of continuous wave motions. This put him at odds with the mainstream physics community during the 1950s, but he remained steadfast in his mathematical convictions. He eventually returned to his beloved hometown of Vienna. On January 4, 1961, Erwin Schrödinger passed away from tuberculosis at the age of 73. He was a man who refused to be confined to a single discipline. He mapped the geometry of human vision, wrote the foundational equation of quantum mechanics, exposed the philosophical gaps in atomic theory, and predicted the physical architecture of genetic code. Erwin Schrödinger proved that the deepest mysteries of the universe aren't solved by looking at just one piece of the puzzle, but by finding the mathematical language that connects them all. Which brings me to a question for you. Do you think we will ever truly solve the measurement problem Schrödinger highlighted with his famous cat? Or is the boundary between the quantum world and our everyday reality destined to remain a mystery? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If this video sparked your curiosity, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you want to stay entangled with more deep dives into the science and technology that shape our world, subscribe to LynxSifts Tech and Science. I'll catch you in the next one.